Welcome to my channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world.
Listen, I need to tell you something before it's too late. Before they realize I'm talking about it again, my name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm a history teacher from Massachusetts, or at least I was. Until 3 weeks ago, when I found something in my grandmother's attic that shouldn't exist. A map from 1776 showing 14 colonies. Not 13, 14. You're probably thinking I miscounted. That's what I thought too, until I drove to where that 14th colony should be, and found it. It's still there. God help us all, it's still there. If you're listening to this at night, maybe turn on another light. Whatever you do, if you ever see road signs for a place called Pensbrook, don't follow them. Just keep driving. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how this started. How I learned that everything we know about American history is a carefully crafted lie. The story begins now. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon in Salem when I climbed those creaking stairs to Grammy Rose's attic. She'd passed 2 months earlier, peacefully in her sleep at 93, and Mom had finally convinced me to help sort through her things. Grammy Rose had been a collector, the kind who kept everything. Theater tickets from 1952, grocery lists written in fountain pen, photographs of people whose names were lost to time. The attic smelled like old paper and lavender sachets, that particular scent that makes you feel safe and sad at the same time. I was going through a trunk of Revolutionary War memorabilia when I found it. Tucked between 2 volumes of Common Sense was a leather portfolio, brittle with age. Inside, protected by oilcloth, was a map, not just any map. This was hand-drawn, the ink faded to sepia, but the coastline was unmistakably the eastern seaboard. All the colonies were there, Massachusetts, Virginia, New York, Pennsylvania, all 13, except there was a 14th. Nestled between Pennsylvania and Maryland, marked with the same careful script as the others, was a colony called Pensbrook. Population, according to the tiny notation, 8,000 souls. My hands trembled as I held it up to the dusty light filtering through the attic window. This had to be a mistake, maybe someone's alternate history project, or a piece of fiction Grammy Rose had collected. But then I saw the signature at the bottom, John Hancock, T-A-A-A-A-A, John Hancock, and unless I was very mistaken, that was his actual signature, not a copy. The paper itself felt wrong under my fingertips. Too smooth for something supposedly centuries old, yet brittle in a way that modern reproductions never achieved. When I tilted it toward the light, I could see watermarks, intricate designs that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Colonial-era paper-making techniques, but executed with an impossible precision. I spent the next 3 hours in that attic, searching for any other mention of Pensbrook. I found 2 more references, a letter dated July 1776 discussing trade agreements with our brothers in Pensbrook, and a shipping manifest listing tobacco shipments from Pensbrook Harbor. But there was something else, hidden beneath a stack of Grammy Rose's old teaching materials. A photograph, black and white, dated 1962. It showed Grammy Rose as a young woman standing next to a road sign. The sign was partially obscured by shadow, but I could make out enough letters, P-E-N's B-R-O-O-K, 5 miles. In the photograph, Grammy Rose wasn't smiling. Her face held an expression I'd never seen before, terror barely held in check. Her hand was raised, as if trying to block the camera, and in the background, something moved. A blur of motion that shouldn't exist in a still photograph. I turned the photo over. In Grammy Rose's neat handwriting, some doors should never be opened, some roads should never be traveled. I pray you never find this, RF 1962. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that map, those documents. Every history book I'd ever read, every lesson I'd ever taught, 13 colonies. Always 13. The next morning I called in sick to work, something I never did. I drove to the Boston Public Library, spent the entire day in their historical archives. Nothing. Not a single reference to Pensbrook in any official document. But here's where it gets strange, really strange. When I searched property records for the area where Pensbrook should be, according to Grammy's map, there was a gap. A perfect colony-sized gap where no properties were listed, no towns were registered, nothing. It was as if someone had taken an eraser to that part of the map. The librarian who helped me was an elderly woman named Mrs. Hartwell, been working there for 40 years. When I mentioned Pensbrook, she froze. Her face went pale, and she glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Where did you hear that name?" she whispered. "I found some old documents. Burn them," she said, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. Whatever you found, burn it tonight. Some history is forgotten for good reason." Before I could ask what she meant, she hurried away, leaving me alone with my photocopied documents and growing dread. I should have left it alone, I know that now. Should have chalked it up to some historical anomaly, some surveying error, but I've always been too curious for my own good. Mom used to say it would get me in trouble one day. She was right. That Friday, I packed my Honda Civic with camping gear, told my roommate I was visiting friends in Philadelphia, and drove south. I had Grammy's map on the passenger seat, weighted down with my coffee thermos. The drive was normal at first, Route 95 through Connecticut, New York, New Jersey. Familiar territory. But as I got closer to where Pensbrook should be, according to the map, things began to feel different. It started with the radio. NPR faded to static, which happens sometimes, but when I tried to find another station, nothing. Just white noise across the entire spectrum. My phone still showed full bars, but when I tried to use GPS, it kept saying, "searching for signal." The air itself seemed to thicken, taking on a quality I'd never experienced. It tasted of copper and old leaves, of things buried too long in damp earth. My car's air conditioning couldn't dispel the cloying atmosphere that seeped in through the vents. Then I saw it, a road sign I'd never seen before. Wooden, not metal like the others. Weathered and old, but still readable, Pensbrook, 12 miles, established 1682. My heart hammered in my chest. I almost missed the exit, had to swerve across 2 lanes to make it. The other drivers honked, but their horns sounded muffled, distant. The exit ramp curved down into thick forest, trees I didn't recognize, with bark that looked almost black in the afternoon sun. The road was paved, but it was a type of asphalt I'd never seen, darker, with an oily sheen that made my tires whisper instead of hum. 5 miles in, I passed another sign, "Welcome to Pensbrook County. Please observe all local customs." Local customs? What did that mean? The forest pressed closer, branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out most of the light. It was only 3 in the afternoon, but it felt like dusk. I turned on my headlights, and that's when I saw the first house. It was a colonial-style home, which made sense, except it looked new. Not restored, new, as if someone had built a 700s house yesterday, using period-appropriate materials and methods. Smoke drifted from the chimney, candlelight flickered in the windows. No power lines, I realized. No telephone poles. I slowed down, staring. A woman stood in the garden, wearing a long dress and white bonnet, tending to what looked like a vegetable plot. She looked up as I passed, and for just a moment, our eyes met. Her face was wrong. I can't explain it better than that. All the features were where they should be, but something about the proportions, the way her mouth moved when she smiled, it was like looking at a reflection in disturbed water. I drove faster. More houses appeared, all in that same colonial style, all looking freshly built but centuries old. People moved between them, dressed in period clothing, going about their daily business as if it was perfectly normal to live in the 700s. Then I reached the town center and had to pull over. It was perfect, too perfect. A village green with a meeting house, a blacksmith shop with smoke rising from the forge, a general store with barrels out front. Horse-drawn carriages moved down the cobblestone streets. Men in tricorn hats tipped them to ladies in long dresses. But no one looked at my car, not one person. They moved around it like water around a stone, never acknowledging its existence. I sat there for 10 minutes, engine running, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This had to be some kind of historical reenactment, some living history museum I'd never heard of. But the scale, the completeness of it, finally, I turned off the engine and got out. The silence hit me first, no ambient noise, no distant traffic, no planes overhead, no electrical hum. Just nothing. Even my footsteps seemed muted on the cobblestones. I walked toward the general store, my modern clothes feeling suddenly absurd. A few people glanced my way, then quickly looked elsewhere. Their faces, all of them, had that same unsettling quality. Almost right, but not quite. The store's door was heavy oak with iron hinges that groaned when I pushed it open. Inside, the smell of molasses and leather and something else, something sweet and rotten. A man stood behind the counter, tall and thin, wearing a leather apron. He smiled when he saw me. Too many teeth in that smile. "Afternoon, miss." His voice was like autumn leaves scraping across pavement. "You're new to Pensbrook." It wasn't a question. "I'm just passing through." "No one passes through Pensbrook." He tilted his head, bird-like. "They find us, or they don't. You found us. I was just curious about the town. It's not on any modern maps." His smile widened, impossibly wide. Modern. What a curious word. We've been here since 1682. Never left, never changed. The other colonies, they forgot us. On purpose, you see, after what happened. What happened? He leaned forward, and I could smell his breath like soil and copper. We made a different deal, not with King George, not with the Continental Congress. We made our deal with something much older, and in return we got to keep our old ways, forever. A woman entered the store then, carrying a basket. She nodded to the shopkeeper, then looked at me. Her eyes, God, her eyes were like looking into empty houses. "She's asking questions, Thomas." "Aye, Martha, she's curious. They always are, the ones who find the old maps." "Grammy Rose's map," I whispered. Thomas laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Rose Fletcher? Oh yes, her grandmother was from Pensbrook, left in 1842. We let her go, a kindness, because she was with child. But she took a map. We've been waiting for someone to find it, to come home." "Home?" I backed toward the door. "I should go. The sun sets early in Pensbrook," Martha said, her voice sing-song. "And our roads, they change after dark. You wouldn't want to get lost, would you?" I fumbled for the door handle, pushed it open, stumbled out into the too quiet street. The sun was indeed lower, much lower than it should be for 4 o'clock. I ran to my car, hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The engine turned over, thank God, and I drove, fast. Too fast for those narrow streets, but I didn't care. The houses blurred past, faces in windows, watching, always watching. But when I reached the edge of town, where that road should have led back to the highway, it wasn't there. The road just continued. Into more forest, darker forest. I turned around, drove back through town, tried another route. Same thing. Every road led deeper into Pensbrook, never out. The sun was setting now, actually setting, and it was only 4:30 according to my phone. My phone, which still had no signal, showed no GPS, couldn't even tell me the correct time anymore because when I looked again, it said 11:47 p.m. That's when I saw the inn. The Pensbrook Inn sat on the corner of King Street and Colony Way, 3 stories of timber and stone that seemed to lean inward, as if listening to secrets. A painted sign swung in a breeze I couldn't feel, showing a ship that shouldn't exist, with too many sails, sailing on a sea that looked like stars. I didn't want to stop, but my gas gauge was dropping faster than it should, much faster, in the span of 5 minutes. I'd gone from half a tank to nearly empty, and the darkness, it was spreading like spilled ink across the sky. The inn's door opened before I reached it. A woman stood there, younger than Martha, but with that same wrong-faced quality, wearing a gray dress with a white apron. "Miss Mitchell," she said, "we've prepared your room. I hadn't told anyone my name. How did your grandmother sent word you might come eventually. The Fletcher room has been waiting since 1842. My legs felt like water, but what choice did I have? Sleep in my car until the gas ran out? Try to walk through those dark woods? The inn's interior was warm, too warm. Fireplaces blazed in every room, but the heat felt artificial, like standing in front of a painting of fire and somehow feeling its warmth. She led me upstairs, the steps groaning under our weight. The hallway stretched longer than the building should allow, door after door, all closed, all silent. We walked for what felt like minutes before reaching the end. The Fletcher room. She produced an iron key from her apron, turned it in the lock. The mechanism clicked like breaking bones. The room was normal, suspiciously normal. A 4-poster bed with clean linens, a washing basin, a writing desk by the window. It could have been any colonial-era room in any museum, except for one detail. On the desk was a journal, and my name was written on the cover. My full name, Sarah Rose Mitchell. "Dinner is at 8, the woman said. "Don't be late. They don't like it when guests are late." She left before I could ask who they were. I went to the window first, looked out at the town. The darkness was complete now, but I could see lights, not electric lights, not even gas. These were different, cold and blue, moving through the streets like searching eyes. The journal drew me back. I opened it, found my grandmother's handwriting. But that was impossible. This journal was old, the pages yellowed and brittle. The first entry was dated 1842. "My dearest descendant, if you are reading this, you have found the map I should have destroyed. Forgive me, but I couldn't. Pensbrook is in our blood, you see. We can leave, but we always return. One from every generation, that was the deal my grandmother made." I read on, my hands trembling. Pensbrook feeds on memory, on history, on the forgotten. "It exists between, neither here nor there, neither then nor now. The other colonies erased it from history in 1776, when they realized what it had become. But erasure isn't destruction. Pensbrook simply moved sideways into the spaces between moments." The journal continued in my grandmother's younger handwriting, detailing her first night in the inn. How she'd heard whispers in the walls, voices of colonists long dead, or perhaps never alive at all. How she'd seen shadows moving independently of their owners. How the very air seemed to thicken with each passing hour. "The innkeeper brought me tea," one entry read. "It smelled of herbs I didn't recognize, tasted of earth and forgotten dreams." After drinking it, I could hear them more clearly, the voices. They spoke of the original bargain, how William Pensbrook had summoned something from the deep woods in 1682, something that promised prosperity in exchange for permanence. The colony would never fail, never be conquered, never change, but permanence, they discovered, was indistinguishable from imprisonment. Another page written in Shakespeare script. I understand now why they let some of us leave, why they need the bloodline to continue outside these borders. They require witnesses, people who carry the memory of Pensbrook into the world. We become anchors, keeping them tethered to reality while they exist in their timeless prison. Each generation must provide a sacrifice, not of life, but of freedom. One must stay to maintain the balance. A bell rang somewhere in the inn, deep and resonant. Dinner time. I didn't want to go, but the journal's next line stopped me cold. Whatever you do, don't miss dinner. They get hungry when dinner is missed, and they've been hungry for so long. The dining room was full when I arrived. 20 or 30 people, all in period dress, all with those not quite right faces. They turned as one when I entered, smiled as one. Miss Mitchell, a man at the head of the table, stood. He was better than the others, more convincing, until you noticed his shadow moved independently from his body. Please, join us. We have much to discuss. The only empty chair was in the middle of the table. I had no choice but to squeeze past the others to reach it. Each one I passed whispered something, but not in English. Not in any language I recognized. It sounded like wind through empty houses. The food appeared without anyone serving it. Plates of meat I didn't recognize, vegetables that were the wrong colors, bread that steamed without being warm. Everyone ate with enthusiasm, the sound of their chewing somehow too loud, too wet, too wet. I pushed my food around, tried to look like I was eating. You're not hungry, the man at the head observed. His name I somehow knew was William Pensbrook, the founder. Your grandmother had the same problem her first night. My grandmother was here one night in 1842. He laughed. Others joined in, the sound like a music box playing underwater. Time moves differently in Pensbrook, Miss Mitchell. Your grandmother stayed for what you would call 10 years, though only one night passed outside. She learned our ways, our customs, our needs. What do you need? His shadow leaned forward while his body stayed still. To be remembered, to exist. The other colonies tried to forget us, write us out of history, but we made sure one map survived. One map that would call our blood back home. I'm not staying, oh, but you are. You see, the road out only appears when someone new arrives to take your place. And we've been very careful about who finds that map. Only Fletchers, only Mitchells, only our blood. The candles flickered, went out, plunged us into darkness. But I could still see them, all of them, glowing faintly from within like deep sea creatures. Run, someone whispered. A different voice, familiar. Sarah, run now, Grammy Rose. It was Grammy Rose's voice. I bolted from my chair, ran blind through the darkness, found the door by memory, burst through into the hallway. Behind me, that horrible laughter getting closer. I ran through the inn's twisted hallways, doors slamming open behind me, things that weren't quite footsteps following. The building was wrong. I'd turn a corner and find myself back where I started, go upstairs that led down, through doors that opened onto walls. Then I saw her, Grammy Rose, young, maybe 25, standing at the end of a hallway that hadn't been there before. This way, Sarah. Quickly, she led me through a door I hadn't seen, into a room filled with maps. Hundreds of them, covering every wall, every surface. Maps of Pensbrook through the centuries, showing it moving, shifting, always existing in the spaces between. I never left, she said, and I realized the truth. This wasn't a ghost, wasn't a memory. This was Grammy Rose, a part of her that had stayed behind in 1842. Time doesn't work right here. I'm still 25, still trying to escape, while another me lived a full life outside. How do I get out? You don't, not the normal way. But there's something they don't want you to know. Pensbrook isn't just forgotten, it's forbidden. The Founding Fathers didn't just erase it, they sealed it. The Liberty Bell, the crack, that was the sound of the seal breaking. She pulled out a map, different from the others. This one showed paths, routes through time itself. Every July 4th, at the exact moment the declaration was signed, the seal weakens. You can slip through, but only if you're at the right place. Where? The meeting house. The center of town. That's where they made their original deal, sold their souls for immortality, for permanence. But permanence became prison. They can't leave, can't die, can't change. A crash from below. They were coming. It's July 2nd, I said. I have to survive 2 days? Time moves differently, remember? It could be 2 hours or 2 years. But you have something they don't expect, your car. Modern technology disrupts them. Why do you think they pretend it doesn't exist? The door burst open. William Pensbrook stood there, his shadow writhing like smoke. Rose, still causing trouble after all these years. Grammy Rose stepped forward, and I saw her true form, part human, part something else, part of Pensbrook now, forever. Run, Sarah, drive, don't stop, no matter what you see. I ran, Pensbrook reaching for me, his hand passing through Grammy Rose as she held him back. Down the stairs, through the dining room where the others sat frozen, watching, always watching. My car was still there, engine still running somehow. I'd never turned it off. I jumped in, slammed it into drive, floored it. The town exploded into motion, people, things that looked like people, pouring from every building. They moved wrong, too fast, joints bending in impossible directions. They reached for the car, hands passing through metal like water, but never quite catching hold. I drove wildly, randomly, turning at every intersection, trying to find that meeting house. The gas gauge read empty, but the engine kept running. The clock on the dashboard spun wildly, hours passing in seconds, seconds stretching into hours. Then I saw it, the meeting house, but it was wrong. It was every meeting house, all at once. Colonial, federal, modern, all superimposed, existing simultaneously. I drove straight at it. The world exploded into fragments. I saw Pensbrook as it really was. Not a town, but a wound. A place where reality had been torn, where something ancient and hungry had been invited in, given form, given citizens to puppet. I saw the real colonists, still there, still aware, trapped inside their own bodies for 300 years, screaming silently as something else moved them, spoke through them, fed on their memories. I saw the deal they'd made, not for immortality, but for prosperity. They'd wanted their colony to thrive, to surpass all others, and it had become eternal, successful beyond measure, forgotten by design but always there, always feeding. The car hit the meeting house steps, crashed through the doors into impossible space. I was driving through history, through July 4th, 1776, through the signing, through the moment 13 colonies became a nation, and one was deliberately left behind. The crack of the Liberty Bell was deafening, reality splitting, and then I was on Route 95, Sunday, July 4th, 6:47 a.m. My car was parked at a rest stop, engine off, half a tank of gas. My phone showed dozens of missed calls. I'd been gone for 2 days. The map was gone. The journal, everything except a note in Grammy Rose's handwriting. Some of us are still there. Every generation, one goes back. The deal continues. Don't have children, Sarah. Let it end with us. I drove home in silence, called in sick for another week. Tried to pretend it hadn't happened. But I knew the truth now. We all know it, deep down. There weren't 13 original colonies. There were 14. And the 14th is still there, waiting, hungry, feeding on the forgotten. Growing stronger every time someone says there were only 13, every time history repeats the lie. I teach differently now. I can't help it. When I get to the Revolutionary War unit, I pause. The students think I'm being dramatic, but I'm listening. Listening for that whisper, that voice that says, remember Pensbrook. Because if we forget completely, if every map is destroyed, every memory erased, then the seal breaks permanently. And Pensbrook won't be content to exist in the shadows anymore. They'll come for the other colonies. The ones that betrayed them, forgot them, starting with the descendants of those who signed their erasure. My grandmother was wrong about one thing, though. It doesn't end with me. I found out last week. I'm pregnant. And I know, deep in my bones, that one day my child will find a map, an old map, tucked away in an attic, and the cycle will begin again. But maybe that's how it has to be. Maybe someone needs to check, to make sure the seal holds, to make sure Pensbrook stays forgotten. Or maybe that's just what they want me to think. If you're still listening, check your attic, your grandmother's things, your old family documents. Look for maps from before 1776, count the colonies. And if you find 14, if you see the name Pensbrook, burn it immediately. Unless, of course, you're one of us, one of the bloodlines, in which case you'll be visiting soon, whether you want to or not. The road to Pensbrook only appears for those it calls, sweet dreams, and remember, history is written by the victors, but the forgotten never stop trying to be remembered. Tell me, how many colonies do you think there were? Comment below if you dare, and subscribe, because I'll be sharing more maps soon, more places that shouldn't exist, but do, they always do, they always do. Story number 2. The coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. Not because I was clumsy, but because standing in my doorway, holding my roommate Jake's hand, was Sarah Chen. My Sarah. The same Sarah who died in my arms 3 years ago after that accident on Highway 10-1. The same dimple on her left cheek when she smiled. The same way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The same laugh that used to make my worst days better, but she looked at me like a complete stranger. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I stammered, dropping to collect the broken pieces. You look exactly like someone I used to know, she laughed. That laugh, "Don't worry about it, I get that a lot, I must have one of those faces." She extended her hand as I stood up. "I'm Sarah, by the way. Jake's told me so much about you, Marcus." Her hand was warm, real, alive. How do you shake hands with a ghost? If you're listening to this at night, maybe check that your doors are locked. Because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about death, about memory, and about the people sleeping in the room next to yours. The story begins now. Living in downtown Portland had its perks. The apartment Jake and I shared on Northwest 23rd Street was perfect. Exposed brick walls, huge windows overlooking the city, and just a 10-minute walk from Powell's Books where I worked. We'd been roommates for 2 years, and honestly, Jake was the best roommate I'd ever had. Clean, quiet, paid rent on time. We weren't best friends, but we got along well enough. That Tuesday evening changed everything. I was making dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta with marinara, when I heard Jake's key in the lock. "Hey Marcus," he called out, "I want you to meet someone special." I turned from the stove, ready with my usual friendly roommate smile, and that's when my world tilted sideways. Sarah stood there in our doorway. Not someone who looked like Sarah. Not Sarah's twin or cousin or doppelganger. It was her. Every detail was perfect, too perfect, too perfect. The small scar above her right eyebrow from when she fell off her bike at age 7. The way she stood with her weight slightly on her left foot. The constellation of freckles on her nose that I used to trace with my finger. "Marcus?" Jake's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You okay, buddy?" The broken mug, the coffee spreading across the floor, my hands shaking as I grabbed paper towels. "Yeah, sorry, just butterfingers today." I forced myself to look at her again. "Nice to meet you, Sarah." She helped me clean up the mess, and that made it worse somehow. The way she moved was exactly right. The way she hummed under her breath while wiping the floor. It was the same tuneless melody Sarah always hummed when she was focused on something. "So how long have you two been?" I gestured vaguely between them. "About 3 weeks," Jake beamed, putting his arm around her. "We met at that new coffee shop on Burnside, Stumptown. She was reading Murakami, and I just had to talk to her." Norwegian Wood. Sarah's favorite book. She'd read it to me during our road trip to Crater Lake, right before. That's great," I managed. "Really great." They settled onto the couch while I finished cooking, Jake telling the story of how he'd nearly spilled his coffee trying to impress her. Sarah laughed at all the right moments, but her eyes, something was off about her eyes. They moved around our apartment like she was cataloging everything, memorizing it. During dinner, I couldn't stop staring. Every mannerism, every gesture, every word was perfectly Sarah, but also wasn't. Like someone had studied hours of footage and learned to imitate her flawlessly. But there were these tiny gaps, microseconds where her expression would go completely blank before snapping back to normal. "Marcus works at Powell's," Jake was saying, "in the rare book section." "Oh, I love old books," Sarah said, and my fork froze halfway to my mouth. "There's something about the smell of old paper, like vanilla and almonds, the exact words." The exact words Sarah had said on our first date 4 years ago. "Do you? Have you ever been to Portland before?" I asked carefully. She tilted her head. That familiar gesture that used to mean she was thinking, "You know, it's strange. Sometimes I feel like I have, but I can't remember when. I moved here from Seattle 2 months ago for work. What do you do?" "Graphic design." "Freelance mostly." She trailed off, that blank look flashing across her face again. I work from home." Jake squeezed her hand. "She's being modest. She's incredibly talented. You should see her portfolio." The conversation continued. But I was somewhere else, 3 years in the past, holding the real Sarah as the rain poured down on Highway 101. The truck that had swerved into our lane, the sound of metal crushing metal, her blood on my hands as I tried to stop the bleeding. Her last words, "I'll find you again, Marcus." Somehow, I thought it was just the delirium of dying. People say all kinds of things when, "Marcus?" Jake was looking at me with concern. "You sure you're okay? You've been really quiet. Just tired. Long day at work." I stood up, needing distance from her, from whatever was wearing Sarah's face. "I think I'm going to turn in early." "Oh, before you go," Sarah said, and she pulled out her phone. "Could I get your number?" Jake says you know all the best restaurants in the neighborhood, and I'm still learning my way around. I watched my hands type my number into her phone like they belonged to someone else. When I handed it back, our fingers brushed, ice cold. Her skin was ice cold. But she didn't seem to notice my flinch, just smiled that perfect Sarah smile and said, "Thanks, Marcus. It was really nice meeting you. I locked my bedroom door that night." First time in 2 years of living with Jake. Then I sat on my bed and pulled out my laptop, typing Sarah Chen Obituary Portland 2022 into Google. There it was, the Portland Tribune article. Local woman dies in Highway 101 accident. Sarah's photo staring back at me from the screen. the same face that was currently sitting on my couch, watching Netflix with my roommate. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there listening to the sounds from the living room, their laughter, the TV, Jake's footsteps heading to his room around midnight, and then nothing. But I knew she was still out there. I could feel her presence like electricity in the air. Around 3 a.m. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate. They stopped right outside my door. The doorknob turned. Thank God I'd locked it. The knob jiggled once, twice. Then those footsteps moved away, back toward the living room. I stayed frozen until sunrise when I heard Jake moving around, getting ready for his job at the Nike headquarters. Only when I heard both of them leave did I finally emerge. The living room looked normal. Except, on the coffee table, written in the dust, were 2 words. Remember me? The next few days were torture. Sarah was at our apartment constantly, and every interaction felt like walking through a minefield. She'd make references to things only my Sarah would know, places we'd been, jokes we'd shared. But whenever I tried to probe deeper, that blank look would return. Have we met before? I asked her one evening while Jake was in the shower. Before the coffee shop, I mean? She was sketching something in a notebook, and I recognized the drawing style immediately. The same flowing lines Sarah used to use. I don't think so, she said without looking up. But, do you ever get déjà vu? Like you're living someone else's memories? My blood went cold. What do you mean? She finally looked at me, and for just a second I saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition? Fear? Sometimes I have these dreams, about places I've never been, people I've never met. There's this lake with the bluest water, Crater Lake, where I'd proposed to Sarah the day before the accident, and there's someone with me, but I can never see their face. They're always just out of view, she shook her head. Sorry, that's weird. I don't know why I'm telling you this. It's not weird, I said carefully. Dreams can feel very real sometimes. She went back to sketching, but I saw what she was drawing now. It was the view from Crater Lake. Perfect in every detail. That night, I made a decision. I had to know what was happening, so I waited until Jake was asleep, then crept into the living room where Sarah was still up, reading. Norwegian Wood, I said, making her jump. God, Marcus, you scared me. She put her hand over her heart, but I noticed she wasn't breathing hard. No real surprise reaction. Why that book? I asked, sitting across from her. I've always loved it, ever since, she frowned. I can't remember when I first read it. Sarah. I said her name with all the weight of our history. Look at me. She did, and for a moment the mask slipped completely. I saw confusion, fear, and underneath it all, love. The same look she'd given me as she died. I know you, she whispered. I don't know how, but I know you. You feel so familiar it hurts. The lake in your dreams, I said slowly. Was there a ring? Her hand flew to her left ring finger where there was nothing, but she rubbed it like something should be there. How did you know that? Before I could answer, Jake's bedroom door opened. Everything okay out here? Sarah's face went blank again. That terrifying emptiness. Everything's fine, babe. Marcus couldn't sleep either. We were just talking about books. Jake looked between us, and I saw something in his expression. Suspicion? Well, don't stay up too late. Sarah, you coming to bed? She stood up mechanically. Of course. As she passed me, she dropped her bookmark. When I bent to pick it up, I saw she'd written something on it. Help me remember. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I needed answers. I drove out to Laurelhurst Cemetery, to Sarah's grave. I hadn't been there since the funeral. The headstone was still there. Sarah Chen, 1996-2022, beloved daughter and friend. But the ground in front of it was disturbed. Not obviously, but I could see places where the grass grew differently. Knew her. She came back 2 months ago. I spun around. An elderly groundskeeper stood there, leaning on a rake. I'm sorry, he looked at the grave. 2 months ago, morning shift found this grave all torn up, like something had clawed its way out from inside. Management covered it up quick. Bad for business, you understand. Probably just animals, they said. He shook his head. But I've worked here 40 years, never seen animals that could break through a sealed casket from the inside. My hands were shaking. Did anyone report it to the police? Report what? An empty grave? The body was gone, son. Nothing to report. He started to walk away, then paused. But if you ask me, sometimes the dead don't stay dead, not when they have unfinished business. I drove home in a daze. Sarah had died. I'd been there. I'd held her body. I'd attended her funeral, but now she was back, and she didn't remember dying. Didn't fully remember me. When I got home, Jake was at work, but Sarah was there, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop. We need to talk, I said. She looked up, and this time the recognition was immediate. Marcus. My Marcus. You remember? Pieces. Fragments. Like trying to hold water in my hands, she stood up, moving toward me. I remember loving you. I remember a ring. I remember rain and pain and telling you I'd find you again. You died, Sarah, 3 years ago. She nodded slowly. I know. I don't know, but I know. Does that make sense? She laughed bitterly. Nothing makes sense anymore. Why, Jake? Why are you with my roommate? I don't know. I was drawn here, to this building, to this apartment. And when I met him, it felt safe. Like I was close to where I needed to be. She reached out, then pulled her hand back. But every time I look at you, it's like my heart is being pulled out of my chest, like my body remembers even when my mind doesn't. I wanted to hold her. God, I wanted to hold her so badly. What's the last thing you clearly remember? I asked. She thought, waking up 2 months ago. In an apartment in Seattle that I apparently had been living in for years, with a job I didn't remember getting and a life that felt like wearing someone else's clothes. But everyone knew me, had photos with me, had memories of me, except they weren't my memories. And before that, nothing. Like I didn't exist before 2 months ago, she paused. Except in dreams. In dreams, I remember everything. Us, our life. The accident, then why don't you remember when you're awake? She gave me a look that was pure Sarah, frustrated and determined. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Something won't let me remember. Every time I get close, it's like there's this wall in my mind. That night changed our dynamic completely. Jake noticed something was different. Sarah and I were careful never to be alone together, barely made eye contact. The apartment felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark, but the dreams got worse, not mine, hers. I'd hear her crying out in Jake's room, calling my name. Jake would try to comfort her, but she'd push him away, stumbling into the bathroom where I'd hear her sobbing. One night, around 2 a.m., I found her in the kitchen, making tea with shaking hands. I remembered something, she whispered. The proposal. Crater Lake. You got down on one knee right as the sun was setting, and you said that I wanted to watch every sunset with you for the rest of our lives, I finished. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. We never got to watch another sunset. Sarah, I reached for her, but she stepped back. Don't. If you touch me, I don't know what will happen. I feel like I'm barely holding myself together as it is. She wiped her eyes. There's something else. In the dreams, after the accident, I remember being somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold, and there was a voice offering me a deal. What kind of deal? To come back, to find you again. But she struggled to remember. There were conditions, rules. I had to forget. I had to start fresh. I couldn't just come back to my old life. But you're remembering anyway. Which means I'm breaking the rules. She looked at me with those familiar brown eyes. Marcus, I'm scared. What if I'm not supposed to be here? What if whatever brought me back? The lights in the kitchen flickered. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. Sarah. Her eyes had rolled back, showing only white. When she spoke, it wasn't her voice. It was something older, deeper, wrong. She made a bargain. Memory for life. Love for existence. She's breaking the terms. Who are you? I demanded. The keeper of contracts. The guardian of the threshold. She cannot have both worlds. Sarah's body convulsed and she collapsed. I caught her before she hit the floor. Sarah! Sarah, wake up! Her eyes fluttered open, her normal, beautiful eyes. Marcus? What happened? You don't remember? She shook her head, then winced. My head is killing me. Did I faint? I helped her to the couch. She was burning up with fever now, her skin flushed. I should get Jake, I said, but she grabbed my hand. No, please, just stay with me. I'm remembering more. The accident, the hospital. You holding my hand as she swallowed hard. I died, didn't I? Really died. Yes, but I came back, because I promised you I would. She squeezed my hand tighter. The voice in the dark place, it said I could return, but I couldn't be Sarah Chen anymore. She was dead. I had to be someone new, someone without a past, without memories of my old life, but you're remembering anyway, because of you. Being near you is breaking down whatever walls they put in my mind. She looked at me urgently. Marcus, I think something bad is going to happen. I can feel it. Like something's coming for me. The temperature dropped again. This time, the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, reaching toward us. Jake's door opened. What's going on? I heard voices. He stopped when he saw us on the couch, holding hands. Jake, Sarah said, standing up. I'm so sorry. I haven't been honest with you. What are you talking about? He looked between us, confusion and hurt mixing on his face. I knew Marcus before. We were engaged 3 years ago. Jake's face went through several emotions, confusion, anger, betrayal. What? But you said you'd never been to Portland before. I know what I said. Sarah pressed her palms to her temples. I couldn't remember. But being here, being near him, it's all coming back. You're engaged. Jake looked at me, and I saw real pain in his eyes. To my roommate's fiancée? What kind of sick joke? She died, Jake, I said quietly, 3 years ago, in a car accident. I was there. I held her as she died. Jake laughed bitterly. Right, she died. But here she is, very much alive. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, I heard that voice again, not coming from Sarah this time, but from everywhere and nowhere. The contract is broken. The payment is due. When the lights flickered back on, Sarah was on her knees, clutching her chest. I can't breathe. She looked at me with terrified eyes. "Marcus, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to come back to you." Her skin was growing pale, almost translucent. I could see through her to the wall behind. "No!" I grabbed her, trying to hold her solid, real. "You can't take her." "She came back. She found me. She broke the rules." The voice echoed through the apartment. "Memory or life, not both. Choose, choose." I looked at Sarah, who was fading more with each second. "What do you mean, choose?" "She can stay, but she will never remember, never know who you are, never recall your love. Or she can remember everything and return to the dark." Sarah grabbed my face with her translucent hands. "Let me go, Marcus. It's okay. At least I got to remember. At least I got to see you again. No. There has to be another way." Jake was backed against the wall, staring in horror at the scene unfolding. "Choose quickly," the voice commanded, "or lose her entirely." Time seemed to stop. Sarah was barely visible now, just an outline of the woman I loved. Jake was frozen against the wall, his mouth open in a silent scream. And I stood there, holding on to whatever was left of her, facing an impossible choice. Let her stay but never remember me, or let her go forever. "Wait," I said to the darkness. "You said she made a bargain." "What exactly were the terms?" The voice seemed surprised by my question. "Memory for life. She could return, but without her past." "But she's not the one breaking the contract," I said, my mind racing. "You are." Silence. She held up her end. "She came back without memories." "It's not her fault," she started remembering. "That's your failure, not hers. Your magic, or whatever this is, it wasn't strong enough to hold." Sarah solidified slightly in my arms, looking at me with wonder. "Clever," the voice admitted. "But irrelevant." "The contract states, the contract is void if you couldn't uphold your end," I interrupted. "That's how contracts work. Both parties have obligations. She gave up her memories. You gave her life. But you failed to keep her memories suppressed. That's breach of contract on your part." The temperature in the room fluctuated wildly. The shadows writhed. "You dare lecture me on contracts? I dare protect the woman I love," I shot back. "She died reaching for life, reaching for me, and she earned her second chance. You have no right to take it away because your spell or curse or whatever wasn't strong enough to withstand true love." Jake finally found his voice. "What the hell is happening?" But I didn't look away from the darkness that seemed to be coalescing in the corner of the room. "True love," the voice mused, and now it sounded almost amused. How terribly human, how wonderfully naive, maybe. But it brought her back, didn't it? And it's breaking your hold on her. So maybe it's more powerful than you thought. Sarah was solid again, warm in my arms. She stood up, facing the darkness with me. "I choose both," she said firmly. "I choose life and memory. I choose to remember Marcus, remember our love, remember everything, and I choose to stay. I already paid the price. I died. I spent 3 years in your dark place. The debt is paid." "That's not how it works." "That's exactly how it works," Sarah said, and I heard steel in her voice. "I died. I was at peace. But you offered me a deal, and I took it. I gave up everything, my identity, my past, my memories to come back. But love is stronger than your rules. It always has been." The darkness seemed to pulse, considering. Jake stepped forward, still looking shell-shocked but finding his courage. "Look, I don't understand any of this." "But if she died and came back, then she's been through enough. Let her stay. Please." I felt something shift in the room. The oppressive presence was withdrawing. "Very well," the voice said finally. "The contract is amended. She may stay. She may remember. But there is still a price." "What price?" I asked warily. "She exists between worlds now, neither fully living nor dead. She will age slower, heal faster, and she will see things others cannot, the thin places where worlds meet, the others who have made bargains. The creatures that move in shadows. This is her burden now." Sarah squeezed my hand. "I can live with that." "Then it is done." The darkness dissipated like smoke. The temperature returned to normal. The apartment looked exactly as it had before, except Sarah was different. Still beautiful, still her, but there was something otherworldly in her eyes now. A depth that hadn't been there before. Jake sank onto the couch. "Can someone please explain what just happened, in terms that make sense?" Sarah sat beside him. "Jake, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. When I came back, I didn't remember anything. I was drawn to this apartment, to you, but it was because you were connected to Marcus. My soul was trying to find its way home." "So you really died?" Jake asked. "And came back?" "Yes." "And you and Marcus were engaged?" "Yes." Jake looked at me. "Why didn't you say anything? Would you have believed me?" "Hi, Jake, your new girlfriend is my dead fiancé." He laughed shakily. "Point taken." He looked at Sarah. "So what happens now?" Sarah looked at me, and I saw all our history in her eyes. The love, the loss, the impossible return. Now, she said softly, I get to watch sunsets with Marcus again, like we promised. Jake stood up. I'm going to need a lot of time to process this, and probably therapy, definitely therapy. He headed for his room, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you found each other again, even if it's the weirdest thing I've ever been part of. When we were alone, Sarah finally let me hold her. She was solid, warm, real. I remembered everything the moment I saw you, she whispered. But every time I tried to say something, tried to reach out, it was like my mouth wouldn't work. Like something was controlling me. It's over now, I said, breathing in the scent of her hair. Still vanilla and cinnamon, just like before. Is it? She pulled back to look at me. I'm not the same, Marcus. I can feel it. I'm something else now. Something in between. I don't care. You're here. You're you. That's all that matters. She kissed me then, and it was like coming home after a long, cold journey. But when we pulled apart, I saw her looking at something over my shoulder. Marcus, we're not alone. I turned. There was nothing there. What do you see? Someone else who came back, she said quietly. They're everywhere in the city. People who died and made bargains. People who couldn't let go, she shivered. I can see them all now. This was our new reality. Sarah was back, but she was changed. She could see the hidden world, the spaces between life and death. That was 6 months ago. We got married again last month. Small ceremony at Crater Lake, where it all began. Jake was my best man. He'd eventually accepted everything, though he still jumps whenever Sarah mentions seeing something the rest of us can't. She was right about the others. Portland is full of them, people who made bargains, who came back different. Sarah helps them sometimes, the newly returned who don't understand what's happened to them. She's become something of a guide for the in-between. We Estes. But late at night, when the shadows grow long and the world feels thin, I wonder about the price we really paid. Sarah says she's happy, that being different is worth being together. But sometimes I catch her staring at nothing, watching things I can't see, and there's a loneliness in her eyes that breaks my heart. She's with me, but she's also somewhere else, forever caught between two worlds. Last night she woke up gasping, grabbing my arm. What's wrong? I asked. I saw how it ends, she whispered. Not now, not soon, but eventually. When you die, really die, you won't be able to come back like I did. The door only opens once for each soul. Then we'll make the most of the time we have, I said. She nodded. But I saw the truth in her otherworldly eyes. She'll outlive me, maybe by decades, maybe by centuries. That's the real price of her return. But as I hold her now, feeling her heartbeat against mine, I know we'd both make the same choice again. Love is worth any price, even if it means one day she'll be the one holding me as I fade, knowing she'll have to let me go, knowing she can't follow where I'm going, not this time. So if you're lying in bed right now, listening to this, wondering if it's just a story, pay attention to the shadows in your room, to the spaces that seem a little too dark, to the feeling that you're not quite alone, because Sarah tells me they're everywhere, the returned, walking among us, loving us, trying to remember what it felt like to be fully alive. Maybe you know one, maybe you love one, maybe you are one, and you just don't remember sweet dreams.